Welcome. Happy July 4th. And happy birthday, Worcester. 300. So the Worcester Tercentennial celebration continues here at the Worcester Senior Center with our Distinguished Speaker Series. Today, we welcome Bill Wallace, Executive Director from the Worcester Historical Society. Bill will share highlights of Worcester's rich history. I also want to thank Point 32 Health for sponsoring today's lunch, and Eternal Health for sponsoring today's wonderful Worcester Senior Summer Concert Kickoff, Stomp and Holler. So take it away, Bill.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't know this was a distinguished speaker series, or otherwise I would have sent somebody distinguished, but I'm here instead. Sorry about that. But thank you for inviting me. We're always excited to celebrate Worcester and its history. As Suki said, I'm from the Worcester Historical Museum, and I thought I would take you on a little tour of how Worcester has celebrated Worcester. And we'll see how far we get in this story. And as we know, marking anniversaries. So how have we celebrated in the past, and exactly what were we celebrating? We all have different reasons for celebrating as a community, whether a local anniversary or a national one. I don't know what this celebration is. It's one of the 600,000 images in our collection that's not identified. But imagine getting that crowd in downtown Worcester. That's pretty exciting. So whatever the moment was, it was a moment for cheering, clearly. And Worcester has celebrated lots of things on Main Street, whether it's getting a new uniform for the Worcester City Guards, as you can see here in 1851, where they got their bearskin busbies, those big tall hats like they wear at Buckingham Palace. They were pretty proud of those things. It was about, being rich and famous, I guess. But then years before that, we had celebrations in downtown Worcester in 1774. And no, I wasn't there before you think I was. Don't even go there. 1774, 4,744 militia men, of course they were men in those days, gathered on Worcester's Main Street to throw the British out of the courts as the king was wreaking havoc on his relationship with the colonies. But imagine, 4,744 men on Main Street, Worcester, when the population was probably about 1,800. They came from all over Worcester County. So Worcester has been the scene of celebrations, whether they are about big events or protests, or even more recently for Black Lives Matter, when the streets were filled with people protesting, as they probably were last weekend when we heard the news from the Supreme Court. Worcester streets have been filled with people celebrating. Whether we agree with the celebration or not, they have been celebrating. And maybe one of the societies from Mount Carmel Church on one of the saints' days marching up Shrewsbury Street. I'm not sure which one that was, so if somebody can help me later identify these, you're more than welcome. This is our history. I might be from the Worcester Historical Museum, but I'm talking about our shared history as a community. You all own this as much as I do. I just work there. We're all the historians of Worcester, so you may have a story to add. Or maybe the first Latino parade on Main South, 1972. Really bad picture, but the only one we have, and we're really happy to have it, because Worcester comes together for all occasions. And when was the last time we had elephants on Main Street? Why do you suppose they were parading down Main Street? Because they had to get from the railroad yard to the circus grounds, exactly. So why not make a parade out of it and make some money and get people to go there? It's just darn good advertising. But again, imagine. Do you think we could get that many people for elephants on Main Street today? I'm not so sure. But then more recently, perhaps some of you will remember, 1972 was our last big local celebration. That was the 250th anniversary of Worcester that we're celebrating now. 50 years later, it's the 300th. And maybe you have some of those coins, and maybe you recognize Kim Siborowski. If you knew Henry Siborowski, insurance down in the Canal District, this is his daughter, and his family was very involved in that anniversary, and they tell great stories about it. But what is the point of this 300th? What exactly is it are we celebrating? We have lots of opportunities. You've probably seen this marker. It's just below UMass. No, this one's at the top of the hill. I'm sorry. This one is opposite the old Worcester State Hospital at the intersection of Belmont Street and Shrewsbury Street. It says, if you can't read it that far, I'll read it. The first settlement in this lonely region called Quinsigamond was attempted in 1673, but abandoned during King Philip's War. A second settlement attempted in 1684, soon named Worcester, was also temporarily abandoned because of Indian hostility. We wouldn't write it that way today. Let's just acknowledge that. Permanent occupation was effected in 1713. So you do the math. It's 2022. What are we celebrating? None of those dates, if you add 200 or 300, to make 2022. So what is it we're celebrating? Well, you can see the remnants of these early celebrations or references to them around Worcester. If any of you attended Providence High School, this is the mural that's in there, painted in the late 1940s to commemorate some of the first visits to Worcester by the folks from Boston who are coming from the General Court to try to establish Worcester as a community. As early as 1667, they were sending Reverend John Eliot, who's the guy in the tabs, and Daniel Gookin out here to try to create a settlement. The deal was it had to be occupied, the land had to be cultivated, and the local people from whom they were transitioning the land had to be Christianized. That was the deal from Boston. Those were the rules. And needless to say, none of that works very well, and we probably wouldn't depict that relationship this way today. I think there's lots of conversations about what happens to the indigenous people and their relationship with the English settlers that we probably shouldn't get into today. But as early as 1674, there are a lot of so-called praying towns. It's part of that deal that we have to make the local folks Christians. And so Eliot and Gookin are establishing these praying towns, and you see this is a later map, so the reference to Worcester and Packagug in the middle of it. That's what they were doing. And their settlements, when they come here to discuss this or relate to the native people, the indigenous folks who've been here a lot longer than they had, you also see this marker. This is just below UMass as you're going towards Shrewsbury, Wigwam Hill. One of the three native settlements in Worcester was basically when you're going out 290 and you're crossing the bridge over the lake, it's basically to the right. That's Wigwam Hill, or was Wigwam Hill. And it's where one of the Sagamores lived. The other one is believed to have been around Airport Hill, and the third one is Packagug Hill, where Holy Cross is. So those are the three sort of villages of these folks, and each one had a Sagamore. And so in 1677, those Sagamores deed their rights to the land to these Englishmen who were coming to town. That's the English law. What the indigenous interpretation of that relationship was probably open to question, and it's the subject of conversations nationwide, and who gets to tell the story, what is the story we're telling, and much of what we tell is from a traditional English perspective. The colonists arriving to take the land, and so we have to respect that relationship. Here's Wigwam Hill, basically a wonderful painting about 1850 as you're looking toward the lake. Why are they settling on the lake? Water and protein. It's a great place to settle because you had access to some of your basic needs. And here's the deed, if you want to read it. Who wants to read that out loud? Good luck. But the deed is in the official documents. It is a legitimate deed. What do you suppose they paid for Worcester? Does anyone know what the down payment was for Worcester? 2 coats and 6 yards of cloth was the down payment. The total payment was basically 12 pounds, which was a lot of money in those days probably, but we all go to school and we hear about Manhattan. Well, Worcester was 12 pounds, the 8 square miles. So there's an entire conversation about the understanding of that relationship. Are you paying rent? Are you buying land? And that's beyond us today. It's beyond me. You need a real historian of that relationship and period law. No, actually not. No, part of it becomes Holden. Part of Worcester becomes part of Holden, and part of it was Ward and becomes part of Auburn. So it is slightly smaller than it was originally, but it is pretty much the same corpus. So here we are. We're back to the first settlement, 1673, 1684, and 1713. So the first settlement is at Wigwam Hill, and that's Ephraim Curtis. If any of you knew the late John Curtis from Worcester, it's his family. They don't stay very long because there's just a dispute over the land. Someone once asked me to talk about the history of protests in Worcester. And I said, well, the first one was when the native people burned down that settlement. And that was a legitimate protest on their part because they didn't understand what was going on. It's also part of that regional war, the King Philip's War. The second settlement is nearby here. Anybody know where it would have been? Think about that. That's a reference to the second settlement in the window at the Worcester Historical Museum. Perhaps you've been in our auditorium. That's Samuel Leonard on the left. That's the log cabin that he did not live in, but everyone thought he lived in when the window was made in the 1890s. And that's one of the native people who chased him away in Plains Indian dress because that was the language of the day when the window was done. And here's another reference to it. If you remember old Davis Tower on Lake Quinsigamon, opposite where kind of the state skating rink is now, that's a reference to our little boy, Samuel Leonard. Do you know the story of Hannah Dustin from Haverhill, who's captured by the Indians after she's given birth to a child? She's taken north, part of this Indian raiding party, held captive, like the redeemed captive, the story you hear in Deerfield a lot. And they go to an island in the Merrimack River in Concord, New Hampshire, where they camp overnight. And Samuel Leonard is part of a group they meet up with, and he'd been taken captive a couple of years earlier. So in the middle of the night, he shows Hannah Dustin and her midwife, she had just given birth, and they kill the baby on the trip. It's just a nasty story. Mary Neff, he teaches them how to scalp. So in the middle of the night, they scalp the Indians. And they get canoes and they come back to Massachusetts. They get a bounty for the scalps. This is not a really good story, not one that we want to celebrate, but it is referenced in the window at the Worcester Historical Museum because Worcester is subject to these raids as people misunderstand relationships and they're provoked by European powers. So Davis Tower is a reference to that settlement. It's also on Lake Quinsigamon. But here's our guy who really settles the third time. Is Jonas Rice. And you've probably seen this marker up on Grafton Street, not far away from here. He comes to town in 1713 from Marlborough. The Peace of Utrecht has been effected. This peace established in this European treaty. Everyone's going to be calm, cool, and collected, and they make the trip all the way from Marlborough to Worcester. They've been in a holding pattern in Marlborough. And there's a reference to him, in the Grafton Street School, another one of these sort of 1940, 50 murals. Again, we probably wouldn't paint it or state it the same way today. But here's the site of Jonas Rice's house. Have you ever noticed? It's right around the corner. It's at the corner of Haywood and Vale Streets. And it has that ornamental boulder in it. It's part of the development of the Crompton property, the George Crompton property. And it's a leftover piece of land, so we don't really know, don't tell anybody, but we don't know that that's the exact location of his cabin. But it's pretty good. He's there because of the sight line. He's on a hill. People can see. He can see if raiding parties are coming, and he's close to the lake for water and protein. And there is this doesn't project well here, but there's a boulder there that says this is the home of the first permanent site of the home of the first permanent settler of Worcester in 1713. So there's the sort of the introduction to what it is that we're doing, but still we're stuck at 1713. And I'm no good at math, but you add 300 to that, I come up with 2013. So what is it that we're celebrating? What we're celebrating is the fact that by 1722, there were, and I want to get this exactly correct, there were 500 residents in Worcester. There were 4 garrisons and a lot of people and a church. So by 1722, they had done what that original group said they needed to do in 1667. They'd established a permanent town. And what happens is, and there's Jonas Rice's gravestone in the collections of Worcester Historical Museum, and you can see in the third or fourth line up, it says, first settler in Worcester. That was removed from Worcester Common when the work was being done on Worcester Center because all those gravestones had been laid flat. And the city council sent it to the museum for safekeeping because they didn't think it was right to leave it on the common. So what is it that we're celebrating? Again, we're back 1713, 1722. We've had a lot of parades a couple of weeks ago. I hope you're all there. Hope you're on the common for the celebration. That's a birthday cake that the Worcester Historical Museum team built that was our float down there in the left-hand corner. I was going to bring you pieces today, but it's all dried out. And it's also plywood. So when you see this flag and you think 300 years, and you see this flag everywhere, what is it that we're celebrating? And here it is in language we can understand. June 14th, 1722, the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts says it's okay for you to be a town. You've grown up enough. You've met the criteria. And so you can have a meeting in September. There was a meeting in September. You can have another meeting in September, and you can vote to become an official town. So that's what we're marking with this, is that Worcester has grown up. We sort of take the training wheels off. And it's okay to meet the criteria that at that point at 60 or the better part of 60 years old, you're a real town in the Commonwealth. So you can stand alone. We no longer have to attend to your needs all the time. So they have an annual meeting in March and they become an official town. That's what Worcester is celebrating this year. And that's what it says on the logo. This is the official logo that's on the flag. You can see June 14th, 1722. But the meeting isn't until September or March. June 14th probably sounds really good to them, maybe. But I think the other one, the city, February 29th of 1848, is even better. If you can become a city on a leap year day, that's the date you want to remember. And that's actually the date the state said you could become a city. They didn't vote till a few months later. So I think they went with the more attractive dates. And this logo was adopted when Worcester becomes a city. So you're going to see that logo everywhere. Next time you're in Union Station, look up at the ceiling. You see the logo everywhere. It's 1722, 1849. So let's think about what happens and take a little tour of how we've celebrated that. 1722, you'd think 1822 there'd be a big celebration, wouldn't you? 100 years, a city. Nope. The big news is they're about to build the Blackstone Canal. You all know, just down the street. That is the big news. They're gonna dig the Blackstone Canal, and with that, they understand that Worcester is becoming a real town, and so that the meeting house that you see in the lower picture on the right-hand side, which would be on the site of City Hall, which was the combined space for government and worship, and you better be a Congregationalist in those days because you had to pay money to the church. Remember, it's all about being Christians, and there was a town church. But the churches, or the meeting house as it would have been called then, was where all the decisions were made. If you were going to protest 1774, that's where you voted to do it. If you were going to vote a town manager, that's where you did it. You did it in the meeting house. But with the coming of the Blackstone Canal and Worcester growing up, they realized they needed to separate church and state. So they build the first, what becomes City Hall, to the left of where City Hall sits today. And that's the building you see with the columns on the front of it. And in 1822, they're talking about building a town hall. That's what they're doing 100 years later. They're not having a party, seemingly. If they do, they don't record it, and they didn't invite any of us. And no, I wasn't there 100 years ago, but it was close. So 100 years in, they're just really talking about becoming a real town. The town hall is actually finished in 1824, but it's under construction in 1822. And then it's expanded over the course of time until we build the new City Hall. And if you can imagine, it's on the second floor of that town hall that Jenny Lind sang when she came to town. It was the meeting space. It was on the second floor of that town hall that Abraham Lincoln spoke in 1848 when he came to talk about the beginnings of what we know as the Republican Party and have dinner with his distant cousins up on Elm Street. That's where everyone came together and Worcester made the decisions. And that's where they made the decisions for some of the real celebrations that would follow. The Blackstone Canal opens on October 7th of 1828, and the first railroad arrives on July 4th of 1835. So Worcester is on its way to becoming a really, really big city. And by 1848, it has grown up so much that they apply to become a city. And this is the little notice in the newspaper about how they become a city. Imagine. It's a few words, and it says that the remarks were made by Governor Lincoln and Samuel Burnside. That's the former Governor Lincoln. It says that you can meet on, I've forgotten what the date is, you can meet in a few months, not on February 29th. And the acceptance was 1,000, and you can see the law at the bottom. The rejection was almost 50% of that, 487. So the majority for acceptance is 539. So Worcester becomes a real city in 1848. So there's another date we can add to the list of celebrations. It's like that relative that seems to have a birthday every 6 weeks. Or it's like that nonprofit organization like the Worcester Historical Museum that asks you to give to the annual fund like every day. Or AARP that sends you some invitation to get better insurance because there's a new plan tomorrow. Well, Worcester has a lot of dates that it can celebrate. So this one happened to be 1722. None of these that we've talked about except the date that Worcester can become an official town. The first real celebration in Worcester that we know of came at the end of the Civil War. You can imagine, after all that disruption and hundreds, if not thousands, of men from Worcester County going off and losing their lives, Clara Barton very involved in the Red Cross. And this is a view of Main Street. This is going south on Main Street, and the building on the left is Harrington Corner. So this is one of the triumphal arches that the city builds. This one is built by the city. You can see the names of the various battles, all honor to our gallant Army and Navy. There are at least 3 other of these arches, one up on Lancaster Street, if you can imagine that. One at the Grove Street Works of American Steel and Wire, or Washburn Moen as it would have been then, and the other one is further down Main Street. People were not afraid of parading in those days. When they paraded for miles. It wasn't like Lincoln Square to City Hall. It was a real parade. But imagine, this is look at the paved, those cobblestone streets. There's the beginnings of a trolley. It goes to the Grove Street Works. But can you look at the top of that? See those little spirally little sorts of things that look like they might have fireworks? They, in fact, were gas, and they were nighttime little flares that would. Worcester thought it was on the cutting edge of celebrating the end of the war, but that was the big one. This is the only one that we know of. This is the only image we know of this parade. But that's the first big celebration. It's a successful end of war. It's not a local celebration. So 1872, or 150 years later, you think maybe we could have a 150th anniversary party? Nope, we don't. The big celebration in 1872 is they're about to build the new Union Station, which is opened in 1875. It's in the planning phases across from the current Union Station where the hotel is. It's going to put Worcester on the map because Worcester is then truly the heart of the Commonwealth, the center of the New England transportation route. If you're getting off at Castle Garden, you could come here and get a job in Worcester easily because you didn't have to have a lot of money for a train ticket. If you were Charles Dickens, you could come, well, he's dead by then, but assume a little bit earlier, if you were a performer, you could easily get a train to Worcester. Worcester was the center of the New England transportation route, and Worcester was very proud of that. And the new Union Station is replacing the old little one on Foster Street that's on the left. So Worcester's growing up. It's going big time. It's also talking about building a Civil War monument. And hope you know the Civil War monument on Worcester Common. It's a piece of art, bronze figures, statues. They bring in a sculptor from Rome because Worcester says we're not, no offense if any of you are from there, we're not Holden, we're not Paxton, we're not Charlton. We don't want an overgrown cemetery monument in our common. We are a city and we want a piece of art. We want a piece of true public art. So they reject a lot of these plans and they build the one that we know on the common. 1876 is a big year. Those things are done by 1876. In 1876, the entire country is celebrating its centennial. And this is the big triumphal arch for that. They really spent the city budget on that one. Not really. This is Lincoln Square. So if you imagine you're coming down Belmont Street, that stone wall is in front of the courthouse. So 1776, our country, all of it, 1876. It's kind of a big deal, and they actually do have a parade for this. They come together in various contingents. They decorate the front of that old town hall, which is now the city hall. And the fire department is at Lincoln Square in front of the train station next to Salisbury Mansion, prepared to parade. Everyone gets together because it is the American centennial. It's a big deal. And July 4th, 1876 was the day. The newspaper wrote, "The morning began with a parade by the Studdelfunk Brigade," which is a group of guys who got together and dressed up in crazy costumes and thought they were characters, like you might see on a television program, and they had a quick parade. But the grand procession was 8 divisions. The enthusiasm of the people was genuine and hearty. The general and profuse decorations of public and private buildings and the illuminations at night, with the throngs of perspiring but happy guests, gave the city a festival air with the procession, especially that of the afternoon were notable for the elaborate and tasteful preparations, the excellence of the general amusement, and the total absence of any serious accident or failure. It was kind of a big deal. The military division of this parade, which is not photographed, comprised more than 1,000 men. It was the best feature of the parade, concluded the newspaper, was the fire department. And you see them here with their pumper, prepared to go. Worcester, 1876, a national anniversary. And out of that anniversary, there are lots of celebration at the American House as well. Lots of temperance groups meet there because there's no liquor served in 1876 at the parades. Imagine that. Where was the American Temperance House? Corner of Foster Street, right across from where the old WCIS bank is. Now I think it's Bank Boston. Main Street. And if you look down that alleyway, you can see that old train station that they were replacing. But here's one of the outcomes of 1876. It's the Worcester Continentals. Because who doesn't like to play dress up when you have an anniversary? So this is clearly later. This is 1920s because there's not an early picture of them. But all these Worcesterites who thought they were good Yanks, or maybe adopted Yankees, got together and put on their Revolutionary War costumes, and they were successful into the 1950s. And we all know people who were probably members of this group because they had such a great time. One of the outcomes of 1876. But 1884 is the big one. Do you remember what the dates we heard earlier that might relate to 1884? It was buried in there. It was when the name was changed officially from Quinsigamon Plantation to Worcester in 1684. So that becomes another occasion for partying in Worcester. The city that, never gives up on a chance to have a good party. So this is a big day. This is a big day. October 14th and 15th of 1884. It's another major city-wide celebration. It's a celebration of replacing the Nipmuc name, which is derived from the Nipmuc to be Quinsigamon, to Worcester. It's one of those dates that we perhaps should revisit in terms of our reinterpretation of American history. But the celebration began for that one at Mechanics Hall. Senator George Frisbee Hoare spoke to a packed Mechanics Hall. His speech in the printed souvenir is 40 pages. Imagine. I hope it was good. I hope it was better than this one, let's put it that way. But the next day after his speech, Worcester was alive with celebrations. Quote, "It is safe to say there never before during the 2 centuries of existence in Worcester as town and city had so many people been brought within corporate limits as in the throngs that filled the streets. It was a gala day for Worcester." And this image, there's the official document that they're celebrating. There's another science project if you've got good eyes and glasses. It says in 1684 you can become Worcester. But here's the next arch. This is the huge arch that they create for that. And this one is directly across from City Hall. So Worcester puts up this enormous arch. It's the beacon to the celebration. Welcomes home her sons and daughters. It's all about everyone who's been part of the history of Worcester, just like we are today. And we might leave, we might go somewhere else, we might come back. We are all the story of Worcester. And that's what they're saying as early as 1884. And of course, that's our message at the museum. It's our history. It's our story. We're all part of it. And there's the flip side of it. And an interesting downtown Worcester. The focus of it was, of course, another parade, which they claim is bigger than one in 1876, because the next one's always bigger than the last one, right? And if any of you belong to, and George Bancroft, the great historian from Worcester, writes one of the early histories of the United States. He's the ambassador to Germany. He does all kinds of things. Nothing but a complication of engagements beyond my control would keep me away from the occasion, talking about this 200th anniversary of Worcester. Well, guess what? He doesn't show up. But here are some, for the first time, some pictures of floats from the parade. These are from the Grange. The local Grange. There's a whole series of these pictures that survive. And these pictures are taken at the fairgrounds, not the Norton Fairgrounds that you might remember, but the fairgrounds off from Elm Park, off from Russell Street, where the first perfect game in baseball history is pitched. So imagine riding in one of those things and celebrating all that's great about America, the woman with the spinning wheel, the laborer, everyone who's made the day in the city what it is. An afternoon of band concerts and military groups parading on the Common was followed by a balloon ascension that evening from the Common. Thousands of viewers, and quote, within a few hours of flight, the balloon came down in an open field about 1 mile from the center of Uxbridge. That was the big news. That evening, they had fireworks, just like we have fireworks all the time at Polar Park, and we had them a couple of weeks ago for the anniversary. More details of this parade. Another picture of that, one of those parades. But where do you suppose the fireworks were held in 1884? Everyone went to Elm Park because they were shot from Newton Hill. So if tomorrow night you're over on Shrewsbury Street, think about the old days when it was all Newton Hill. The orientation of Worcester was very different. 1892 brought yet another celebration to Worcester. And we know this is 1892 for two reasons. First of all, the old City Hall is there in the back, but the meeting house is gone because it's about to be replaced by the City Hall. And look at that boat.
You think the umbrellas up on the sun?
I'm sorry?
You think the umbrellas were for the
Oh yes, to keep the sun off from people because they were so delicate. You know, they didn't know about SPFs in those days, and everyone carried a parasol because you didn't want to. It wasn't fashionable to be tanned in those days. But look at that Swedish vessel that's coming down the street. They're all talking in 1892, the 400th anniversary of Columbus, about coming to Worcester from somewhere else. Not 1684 or 1884, coming from Boston and staying to the local population that had been here for thousands of years. We'd kind of like your land. This is 400 years after Columbus saying we want to be part of the American experience, and we're proud of it. So we're going to put our Swedish vessel on the main street. It's the 400th anniversary of Columbus. It's also important to note that it's the 170th anniversary of this 1722. So, like in 1876, the festivities began at Mechanics Hall. That day's civic procession. Did you go to the parade a couple of weeks ago? Anybody? This procession in 1892 was 6 miles long. It was the old days. It stepped off at 11 a.m. and continued without a break from South Main to Lincoln, reversed course. It went down to South Main, then went back to Lincoln Square, went back to City Hall, and disbanded on Front Street. Allegorical cars, like this one that referenced the Swedes, and various nationalities which go to make up this cosmopolitan city were well represented. It's about Worcester becoming our community. If anyone deserves special credit, is that of the Scandinavians, the newspaper reported. Any Scandinavians here? Take pride. Their car, allegorical of a Viking ship, was as good a thing as can be seen in such parade in any city of the world. And you want to know why? The horses which furnished the motive power could not be seen, and it looked as though the Norseman's war vessel was in the streets of Worcester. The horses were underneath the boat. It was a big deal for Worcester. And every manufacturer, every merchant had a float. It wasn't like, a bunch of semis in a parade like it would be today. It was people demonstrating their wares and their viability in Worcester. And you can see where the parade has turned back on itself because one section's going one way and one the other way. Those old stoves, my grandmother had one of those stoves. I remember that stove. So don't date me along with the stove, okay? It is just enormous. Studdlefunks again, balloon, fireworks, it's the same celebration. Here are the Studdlefunks from that parade. See those costumes that they've got on, the masks? And they're making fun of the new Coes Pond Reservoir because it's going to be clean water for the city of Worcester. And they're making fun of that effort because no one quite believes it's really important. T.H. Buckley, the man who was the major lunch wagon manufacturer, had a float in the parade, and this is obviously not it, there's no surviving picture, but he's building a lunch cart on the float. People in Worcester are showing the world how good they are. And here's my favorite that survives. Norton Emery wheel, that's a little steam engine, and they're actually turning wheels on the float. It's a big deal. This is Worcester, it's 1892. We've been around for 170 years. It's an official city. We've got people coming from all over the world to make this the great industrial city of the heart of the Commonwealth. And we're about to build a new city hall to make sure everybody remembers that. Of course, floats through the years changed a little bit. The next time Norton Company does a float, which is in 1922, it's just one big wheel. They're not making wheels. That parade in 1892 ended with yet another balloon ascension. And this one is taking off from the site of the new City Hall. It's abandoned, they're about to build it. And this one, let me see if I can tell you how far it goes. No, I can't tell you how far it goes. This one goes even further. This one goes well beyond Uxbridge, and I don't remember how far it goes. But imagine, again, all those people in downtown Worcester. But also imagine being in a balloon. Imagine the magic when the tallest building in town is maybe 5 stories. You've never been in an airplane, and you've never flown. Imagine the magic when that happened. People think how lucky those other people could be. It was a big day. It was a very, very big day for Worcester. And then, that's so successful in 1892 that 6 years later, they figure, why not do it again? This is the semi-centennial, 1848, 1898, so 50 years. Like I said, Worcester is never reluctant to have a good party. And guess what happens? More of the floats. New City Hall, here are our Vikings, again, are our Swedes, and this time they're recognizing Ericsson, who designs the monitor from the Civil War. And there's our Viking boat yet again, still with the horses hidden underneath it. It comes back for a revisit 6 years later. But imagine if you were at the parade a couple of weeks ago. Here's a reference to that from the veterans. It's a history that we don't forget, that we remember that we are a community that's built on traditions and celebrations. Here's the Armenian float from the 1898 parade. The spirit of Armenia. And there's a reference in the newspaper about how this is the largest parade in the city's history. And then they say it's 5 miles long. Somebody didn't read the newspaper, but the one the previous time was 6 miles long. But so much for editors. But everyone has a float. The Swedes, the Armenians, the Germans, everyone has a float. Unfortunately, they're not well recorded in the photographs. But every part of Worcester is represented. And if you look at the back of that float, see that thing at the back of it? There's a reference to Mount Ararat and the Ark. They're telling the stories of who they are and how they, too, made Worcester the really great city that it is. The King of Sweden comes to town. They build an arch a few years later on Front Street. We're always ready for parade. But the last enormous parade before 1972 is 1922. Whoops. And sadly, there are not good pictures of this. There are lots of inserts in the Telegram and Gazette. But it says the parade, the highlight of the 3-day celebration, was comprised of 17 divisions. There were 3 in our parade a couple of weeks ago. Nearly 20,000 people lined the streets and 300 floats. Was there a float from the senior center? Come on, people, game's on. And intertwined throughout the divisions of the parade marched or rode thousands of Americans of foreign birth and lineage. This is the really important concept, that this is a city that people come from everywhere and they make up an exciting place. Americans of foreign birth and lineage who were there to prove to the world that the American melting pot had boiled assiduously during Worcester's long history. We are a place of people. Almost every nationality was represented by delegations or floats, typifying what America had done for them and what they in turn had done for America. It's that bi-perspective conversation, the one that they weren't having when they took the land earlier. At least 10 automobiles, 1922, keep in mind, at least 10 automobiles filled with young Armenian girls will follow the ex-soldiers, members of their race who participated in World War. However, the newspaper continues, the Chinese band never learned its weird tunes this side of Hong Kong. They love the Chinese band, but they don't quite understand the music. The Chinese band was undeniably the musical hit of the parade. 10 Chinese willing and eager to demonstrate just how they played jazz in the former celestial kingdom, hammered and played on big cymbals and weird instruments, producing a most unusual and singularly noticeable brand of harmony. Brand of harmony. It's all about Worcester being a harmonious place and accepting everything everyone contributes to community. So Worcester has always loved a great celebration, and we could show more pictures of the end of the war. American Steel and Wire in the 1940s. Again, imagine we could get that many people on the street. Barnard Sumner's floats in that parade were actually stagecoaches. But 1972 was the last big one. In 1972, the war is over. We've done our thing, and we are about to celebrate 1972, 250 years. And think about 1972 if you were here. Why was this a cause for real celebration? Was it about 250 years of Worcester, or was it about Worcester that they were part of? What's happening in 1972? They're completing the building have completed the building of Worcester Center, and downtown Worcester has been redefined. Worcester has set a new path for itself, a new future, and that's really what they're celebrating as much as anything. So they have this parade that goes from Lincoln Square down to Front Street, down to in front of the new, what we would call, maybe I would call, People's Bank building, because that's the future of Worcester. It's a new downtown. We're going to become a new exciting city. And there you have it. People in costumes just like they were 100 years earlier, saying Worcester's come a long way. And yeah, there was a smiley face float, of course, because that had been introduced in 1964. We were celebrating all that was good and new about Worcester. And maybe some of you were part of that celebration. This is one of the pages from the book. Ed Clifford and Bill Whipple, names that you'll probably remember, John and Anne Marie Monfredo. Everyone took part in making Worcester celebrate, or encouraging Worcester to celebrate who it was and where it had been. And you can see, here's the reference to the 250, the big show that was at Foley Stadium. I am desperately trying to find the script for this because I think it's probably totally politically incorrect by today's standards. It was recorded by Channel 27. It was an enormous production. This was the highlight of the anniversary, and I have not found the script. I found people who performed in it, but no script. So that's your assignment. If anybody can find me the script, I've got a smiley face button for you or something. Think of your contribution to Worcester history. And here is how things had slowed down for parades. When Norton Company at one point had a working machine on its float, then had a big wheel. Then in 1972, they just had two big wheels on big wheels. Milton Higgins and John Jepson had come down to the leaders of those companies. 1998, Worcester celebrates again its anniversary as a city, and this is what comes of it. There are ice sculptures on the common, but here's what we remember from it. And I think the issue with anniversaries for me is they're a moment in time, but what is the legacy of them? And at some points we're celebrating who we are as a community, that we've come together and we live together, we've shared each other's experiences, and those combined experiences make Worcester really great. But what do we remember? Some of you probably have some of these trinkets in your drawers at home. From maybe you were in an anniversary bell, you dressed up like a Southern belle. Or you were part of the beard campaign, you grew a beard. All these anniversaries have a certain element of nostalgia. They've celebrated who we are as a community. They've called upon tradition. The first congregational church is built in Worcester in 1723. It's built on the corner of what would have then been Green and today Franklin Streets, near where the YWCA is, and then it moves to the Common in 1763. We have celebrated the strength of community, the civic agencies and the people who have been part of it. We've certainly celebrated our prowess as a community. Here's a later fire parade, fire department participation in the parade. We've celebrated the civic agencies, and we've celebrated the industrial success of who we are as a community. It's all about recognizing us, not them, but us. We like to say at the Worcester Historical Museum, it's our city, our history. And the reality of that is that it's yours until you share with all of us, then it becomes ours and we're a stronger community, which is what anniversaries are about. And we've recognized our commitment to the annual good. Here's a dedication moment for the auditorium that's much in question. I particularly like the second guy on the right who's smoking and got white socks on. He probably wouldn't pass inspection today, huh? But at a big event like that. I don't think that would be quite acceptable. And we've decorated the city. There are moments when we've said, these are moments of civic pride. And we still have parades in Worcester. When we're not in COVID and we're marching down Park Avenue in March, who's not Irish? And who's not Worcester? And who's not paying, 82 cents a gallon for gas? It's the benefit of historical documentation. So what are the legacies? We celebrate, we do all these things, we recognize things, but what are the legacy products of these? One of us was talking earlier about the souvenir book for the opening of the auditorium. We have publications that continue to tell us these stories. We've seen bits and pieces from them. We have inserts for the Telegram and Gazette, this one from 1972. But we also have organizations like the Worcester Historical Museum. So this is my moment of salesmanship. This is Samuel Staples on the left. He's not a successful dealer in stationery goods. He's actually a grocer at the corner of Franklin and Main Streets, and he's not a good businessman. When he dies, his friends all say he was good at a lot of things. One of them was not business. But he calls together his friends in 1875 because he realizes we've just had the 1872 celebration. We're on the eve of 1876, and we're not saving our history. We're telling stories at those moments, but we're not preserving those histories. So he forms an organization called the Worcester Society of Antiquity to include everyone. There was an antiquarian society, but you had to be elected to membership. At the Society of Antiquity, it was yours, and you could join that organization. So these are his buddies at the founding of that organization. They look like they're having a rip-roaring good time, don't they? But they are really dedicated to their mission. And the outcome of that is a lot of publications that probably some of you reference if you're doing genealogical work or other work on Worcester, they start to publish the town records. They publish the burial records for Worcester Common, things that are essential to our understanding of the basic and early days of community. That's the job of the Worcester Historical Society, now today Worcester Historical Museum, but it's an outgrowth of these anniversaries. It's one of those legacies. And eventually they moved to Wheaton Square. And in those cases in that chair, you see some of the exhibits from 1922. People in 1922 got together to share their treasures in a loan format, and it was the center of those exhibits. Today, we have an option like Digital Worcester. So we've responded to the technology, and you can go online and you can see pictures, you can search city directories, you don't necessarily have to come to the museum. And we're part of a consortium that's working with City Hall to create a much larger option for the digital access of all the records of Worcester's history, to bring together all this history we've read about. All those groups that were in a parade in 1892 and 1898 give a central place for understanding Worcester history, this legacy that we celebrate whenever there's an anniversary. And City Hall is a legacy project from one of these anniversaries. In 1892, when we're celebrating, they're planning to build a new City Hall. It is a legacy of these anniversaries. We are a big city, and we're going to tell the world that. And we tell the world that in 1922, for the anniversary, the 200th anniversary of Worcester becoming a city. This is like a 64-page insert in the Telegram and Gazette about how we're going to have better parking, we're going to have better parks. We're setting goals for the community. Some of the things that we're all talking about in some of the current conversations around town. What's next for Worcester? Celebrations are not necessarily about where we've been, but how we've built a foundation for what we're going to be. And who do we want to be in the future? And one of those things we wanted to be was 1972. We just built all this complex, and we thought it was the future of Worcester. Anniversaries are a good time to reassess and think about who we are. And to mark moments in town, this is the site of the old meeting house, and it marked in 1876 the site where Isaiah Thomas first read the Declaration of Independence publicly in New England on July 14th of 1776, when he stopped a circuit rider who's taking it to Boston for publication, and it's read on the steps. Worcester has always recognized its history, and there's a star on the sidewalk now to celebrate that. But there are moments we can't forget, and that's what we do in anniversaries. We did it again this year. We celebrated Pickett Park. And in 1972, the big concern was historic preservation. And in order to preserve in 1972, they took Harrington Corner, that you can just see on the right-hand side in that image, with all those original terracotta window caps and everything, and they stripped it down to the current, sort of early plain version that it is now, because they thought that was historic preservation. It was returning to an old day that never existed. We were forgetting the heyday of Worcester. But preserving who we are and who we want to be is a really, really important moment. So out of earlier anniversaries, we've gotten a stronger preservation movement. We've gotten the Worcester Historical Museum. And we've brought community together. That's the critical element of an anniversary. We brought community together to tell those stories, to take note of our history, but also to take note of our future. What counts in that history? Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's about people, it's about businesses, it's about anniversaries. So anniversaries are an opportunity to look back, but they're also, importantly, an anniversary and time to look forward. Worcester goes from an agrarian community to an agricultural community to an industrial center. And it's groups like this that are still recognizing their place in Worcester in 2022 that are critical to its future. Who's making the decisions? Who's establishing our future? What are the stories that we need to better understand and better share in all of those 300 years? And who's making the new Worcester? Welcome, entering Worcester. Who's entering Worcester underneath the sign of 1722 and the three-generation Latino family that are now part of that fabric of community and are critical to its future? What are we doing in 300 years that celebrate on the left the agrarian past and on the right the industrial future? So we always think of on the anniversary as a time for guys that are not a lot of fun to get their party hats on. And I hope you had your party hats on. And I know you're still partying, and you're going to have a big lunch, and you've got 300 years here. But what next? What do you do when the party's over, when you've swept the streets, the cake is gone? What have you said about the future of Worcester that is built upon its past? This is a moment where we can't all just sit back and wait for somebody else to take a part in a conversation about what we're going to do next in Worcester. Take our place in the community to celebrate what was once yours but becomes ours when we put it on display on the street or we create an organization around it. It's no time to sit back. It's actually the time for you all to jump right into Worcester's history. You don't have to have a bathing suit, but you might have a great memory. You might not have a lifeguard certification, but you might have life-building information. You might have a piece of the story that's about coming together for an anniversary, because what was yours becomes ours, and if I go back, everyone takes their place at the table. That's what an anniversary is about, is everyone coming together to celebrate Worcester and taking their place in this huge story that is us. Worcester has an exciting future, but it also has an exciting and interesting past. We learn more about the past every day, but we chart the future. Celebrations like what we've just had and what we've talked about promote diversity. They bring neighbors into dialogue. They increase creativity. They offer opportunities for civic pride. They improve our general psychological well-being. And in short, they make cities like Worcester better places to live because we all come together. So this is the moment to realize that in Worcester, the sky is not the limit. Our possibilities are limitless when we come together. And we can merge the past and the present and build a really exciting future. It was a great weekend for Worcester, and it's an even more exciting future. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to share some of Worcester's celebrations with you and ask you to think about taking your place in Worcester's history, sharing a story, just telling us, sharing a story with us as a museum, letting us scan a picture that's in your family collection, maybe telling a story to a neighbor. One of my favorite things to do years ago when I was younger, more foolish, was I would go to California to see a great uncle who lived north of San Francisco. And I would take people across the Bay Bridge from San Francisco to Oakland. And I would like to stop in the middle of the bridge, which is not a smart thing to do, and say, do you have any idea how much Worcester-made wire is in this bridge? Or if you're going to South Station and you're running to catch a train, it's great to stop someone who's just frantic and say, do you know this building was built by the Norcross brothers of Worcester, Massachusetts? There are stories that you can share with people. You can tell people, take them past the Rice House marker. Tell them about the markers when you're making a quick pass to, Whole Foods, and you're going past those markers. Share those stories and talk about your place in Worcester, because out of an anniversary becomes stronger community. And thank you for taking your place in our story.
All right, take it away.
How's everybody doing? Happy birthday, Worcester. Thanks for coming out. I see some familiar faces. We've been here before. Jody and I are going to start with a song that we have been playing for years, but haven't played recently together. So we hope you enjoy it. I got a girl crush. Hate to admit it, but I got a heart rush like to thank Bill Wallace from the Worcester Historical Museum. I believe he already left, but he gave a great presentation, so thank you for that. And the Worcester Senior Center for having this event. This is a wonderful way to celebrate Worcester. I've only been in Worcester 5 years, but I feel like I've been here forever. This is my home. I love it here. And that's coming from a Southern California girl. So I love Worcester. I really do. Love the people here. Thank you. And thank you, Suki, for having us and for always including us. And all the volunteers. Thank you. Without you, it's not possible. All right, let's have some music. If you want to dance, please get up. We got lots of room. Jody Frawley. Put a little Frawley here in there for you. Jolene, 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 I'm begging of you, please don't take my man. Jolene, 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 oh please don't take him just because she's beyond compare, flaming locks of auburn hair with ivory skin and eyes of emerald green. Your smile is like a breath of spring, your voice is like a summer wind, and I cannot believe without Jolene. He talks about you in his sleep, nothing I can do to keep from crying when he calls you Jolene. And I can easily understand, you can easily take my man, but you don't know what it means to be Jolene. Jolene, 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 I'm begging of you, please don't take my man. Jolene, 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 oh please don't take him just because you can. Kick it. I had to have this talk with you. My happiness depends on you and whatever you decide to do, Jolene. You could have your choice, man. I can never love again. He's the only one for me, Jolene. Jolene, 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 I'm begging of you, please don't take my man. Jolene, 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 oh please don't take him just because you can. Oh please don't take him just because you can.
Little Dolly Parton. We've got Mr. Brian Eggleston on the piano. We've got Dan Villani on the fiddle. We've got Mrs. Villani, Rose on the big fiddle. We have Jody Frawley on the guitar. There's Susan Workman on the vocals.
And tambourine.
And tambourine.
We got Stephen.
And chicken.
We got Stephen Barras on drums. You'll hear him, but you won't see him.
If we like. We're Stop and Holler. Hopefully you're enjoying what you're hearing. Like Susan said, really happy to be here. What a great, presentation by Bill Wallace. And we're just gonna play some country for you. You can find us on Facebook at Stop and Holler Band. All right, there will hopefully, if you're taking any videos or pictures, please put them up there. We would love to see them, okay? You can also go to our website, stopandholler.com. That's stop, letter N, holler.com. We're actually going to do some trivia at some point, like maybe very soon, because we've got a favorite fan award to give out. So anybody with musical knowledge has a chance to win our favorite fan award. Or if you get up and dance, you can win that too. This is, it is. I can let you handle the trivia part. So.
If anybody can tell us who sang background vocals on this song, you will win
The favorite fan award.
Yeah.
And the award's a surprise.
And it's a good prize. You're gonna love it.
And Brian's actually gonna sing.
By the way, they got free shirts. That black shirt that that gentleman's wearing right there, you can get one right over there at that table.
Nothing like a
Save
free
mine.
t-shirt.
I'm all about swag.
Yeah, go ahead. He'll be there for quite a while. Thanks to Eternal Health, because they're actually helped paying for us being here today. Thanks to them.
Was that a hit to take up the collection?
If you'd like to dance to this next number, it's a lovely love song. Get up and dance.
Yeah, do they? For coming here? I don't know what.
Come a little bit closer. Hear what I have to say.
Anna, you can come dance for us.
Just like children sleeping, we can dream of flying away. There's a full moon rising, birds go dancing in the light. We know where the music's playing, birds go out into the night. Cause I'm still in love with you. I wanna see you dance again. Cause I'm still in love with you. I'm still in love with you. I wanna see you dance again. 'Cause I'm still in love with you. All this love is through.
Take with Dan the man.